Hello, everybody, and welcome to part one of the TechTalks Functional HR series. Today's topic is personnel management from hire to retire. My name is David, and I'll be your moderator today. We are broadcasting this session through Teams live events, and the audio can be heard through your device speakers. This session is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. When you join this event, your name, email address, and/or phone number may be viewable by other session participants in the attendee list. By joining, you're agreeing to this experience. The recording will be available on the TechTalks Community Dynamics page within 5 business days. If you have questions for the presenters or need support, please use the Q&A panel located on the right side of your screen. Our presenters will be responding to your questions throughout the presentation and live at the end. Thank you for your patience during these announcements. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Adil Adi, Senior R&D Solution Architect, and Stephen Coppens, Senior R&D Solution Architect. Adil, over to you.
Thank you, David. Just want to confirm if you're able to hear me.
Hear you just fine, Adil.
All right, thank you. Right, so before I start, just a quick about myself. I'm part of the FastTrack team at Microsoft, working as a Senior FastTrack Solution Architect. Here are my contact details if you would have any queries and would like to contact us. With me is Rachel Prophet and Stephen Coppens, and the details are mentioned here. Before going into the agenda, a bit on the objectives of the Tech Talk to set the expectations. So what we will be doing in this session today is reviewing the process maps for jobs, positions, and workers. We'll be discussing key scenarios for personnel actions, some tips for using workflow with personnel actions, review of employment history data model and understanding the date effectivity, managing security and advanced access with personnel management, reviewing the checklist, which is a really good asset that we have built for you while you're implementing your application, as well as the do's and don'ts for implementing personnel management. What I will not be covering today is the detailed aspect of the data migration, security, or workflow, as well as the licensing considerations. As you all know, that this is a 7-part TechTalk functional TechTalk series that we are doing on human resources, and this is part 1 of that series. In the part 1, we will be talking about the personnel management, and in personnel management, the agenda is to talk about the process, the data, the different personnel actions available, data effectivity, security, advanced access, do's and don'ts, and the checklist and resources that we have for you. Great. So starting with the personnel management process. Starting with the personnel management process catalog. Personnel management is at the core of human resources configuration. Many of the downstream features, processes in human resources will not function correctly unless you carefully plan, configure, and test personnel management. Starting at the top of the process catalog, we have created for personnel management have security roles. There are 2 core security roles that are used to grant access to the main functionality of human resources. These are the human resource assistant and human resource manager. Another security role exists for recruiter, which has limited access to some personnel information, including the new request to recruit feature, which we will discuss in more detail in the next Tech Talk in our series. You also have the ability to create custom roles based on your business needs. The next section of the process catalog shows the business process and configurations related to personnel management. We have broken down the processes and configuration into 4 key areas: workers, checklists, organizations, and position actions. You can see the first 4 processes across all the areas. For example, when you hire a worker, you will have worker details to enter, checklists to assign, positions to define and assign, and optionally you can use personnel actions to manage the business process. When we look at the key business processes for workers, this includes managing personal information directly on the worker records, maintaining competencies on workers, such as skills and education background, for example, enrolling the worker in leave and benefit plans, and configuring their basic compensation information so that you can pay the worker. When we look at the key configurations related to workers, you can first see that there are several configurations that cross all 4 areas, including the parameter positions, jobs, and departments, as well as workflows. Focusing in on just the worker-related processes, we have things like ethnic origins, veteran status, employment categories and types, identification types and issuing agencies, labor unions and union agreements, reason codes and language codes, etc., etc. Many of these configurations are optional, but you will want to consider your downstream processes and reporting requirements when deciding which features to enable. Next, we have the checklist-related business process and configuration. This includes the onboarding, offboarding, and transitions. When you think about transitions, this can be promotions within the same positions, lateral movements to another department or team, office location changes, or even changes in the project assignment, for example. When thinking about creating positions and managing the position hierarchy, this spans 2 process areas, including organization and optionally personnel actions. Focusing in on the organization aspects, we have maintaining departments, jobs, legal entities, and teams for the business process. It is important to note that from a logical sequencing of setting up the system, you will want to set up and configure the organization before you set up workers. To support these processes, there are configurations for job functions, families, templates, tasks, and areas of responsibilities, along with position types, position hierarchy types, and validations, and the operation units, as well as the organization hierarchy types. When considering these configurations for your deployment, be sure to be thinking about any other system that may need this data, or if the data will be mastered in somewhere else. When you deploy Dynamics 365 Human Resources, you will want to carefully consider where your organization data will be mastered, integrated, and the downstream processes where the configuration will be enforced. The last process area we have is personnel actions. There are 2 types of personnel actions, and enabling this feature is optional. When you use personnel actions, you can also optionally enable for the actions to help automate the business process behind the changes that are happening to workers and positions within your organization. In the last pillar of our process catalog, we'll focus in on 3 key areas, including data management, integrations, and administration. Let me start with data management. There are many data entities that support the various processes and configurations shown here. The list of entities you see here is by no means an exhaustive list. We will take a closer look at the data model a little later. Next, we have the integrations. In many cases, the need for these integrations will be reduced or eliminated post-infrastructure merge. We have split the integrations into 3 pillars for dual write scenarios: data integrator and other integrations. You will want to consider if this data is needed in the Dataverse or the other downstream systems. The out-of-box dual write templates in F&O include a variety of entities such as workers, jobs, employment, and positions. Likewise, the out-of-box data integrator templates include many of the same entities. Finally, we have the administration components. Many of the configurations have data points with the business process related to personnel management, but they may also have data points with other modules. Again, this is not an exhaustive list of the systems or administrative setups that need to be completed before you start using the system. But these configurations do have a direct impact on personnel management, especially when creating and updating worker information such as addresses. Talking about the address, let's quickly discuss what the different terminologies are when it comes to the global address book view. A party is an entity that assumes a legally binding role when participating in contractual relationships. A party can be a person or organization, and it can be internal or external to the organization. A person or organization that participates in economic activities, a party can be internal or external to an organization. An address book is simply a list of all the address book records. A location is a broad term that can mean any of the following loosely related items: a geographic point or region, a physical address, an electronic address, a functional facility. Roles that are associated with party include customer, vendor, prospect, and contact. An individual party can be associated with one or more party roles in a Microsoft Dynamics AX company. As I mentioned in the beginning, I will show you the entities and the relationships between the various tables in the worker setup process. So here it is. And this slide is just for the reference. This is not a comprehensive list. And these are the Dataverse entities and not the HR entities. Many of the HR entities are the same or very similar in the back office. Right? For example, workers is called workers V3. Similar to that, another slide where for the reference only, the relationships, and this can be used to understand the relationships between the jobs and position setup processes. Again, this is not a comprehensive list, and these are representative of the Dataverse entities, not the actual HR entities. Moving on to the next topic of the agenda for today is the personnel actions. Personnel actions are additional steps that you must complete when you perform certain personnel-related tasks. Example of tasks that might require personnel actions are when you create new positions, modify existing position values, hire new workers, transfer workers, change worker compensation, change position assignments, or terminate the workers. This feature can optionally be enabled by setting enable worker actions and enable position actions fields that have been set to yes in the personnel actions tab on the human resource shared parameters page. It is important to keep in mind that personnel action types are only supported for fixed compensation and not variable compensation. Personnel action goes through a series of steps in the process. And let me quickly explain to you what those different steps are. It obviously starts with a draft. An action would be in a draft, or a process would be in a draft status. If the workflow is attached to the process, the action hasn't. This means that the action has not been submitted. If there is no workflow attached to it, then this means that the action hasn't been completed. Simply, it's in draft mode. In review means that the personnel action has been submitted to the workflow, but the workflow is not completed. Similar to that, approved waiting is that the workflow is completed, but the changes are still in process. And different reasons could be that it's canceled, right? That the workflow was canceled, or the personnel action was recalled, right? Or it was rejected, that the action requests were rejected by the approver. Processing action means that the action request has been approved and the changes are being processed, right? And then workflow complete is when the workflow is completed, the changes have been processed. And yes, the difference between these two can be, doesn't have to be exactly noticed by the user itself, right? Because it would happen in the background. And it could be failed. So the workflow failed because the information was out of date, and if that is the case, you can click on reactivate and get the latest information to continue. If it's completed, this means that the position, for example, was successfully created or modified, or the employee was successfully hired, transferred, or terminated, or had the compensation changed. So it's actually when the completed would mean that not just the workflow, but the action has also completed. The record has been updated as well. A problem can occur when the information is out of date, right? And there can be errors. So you could go to the personnel actions message log to determine the cause of error and fix any changes or fix the issues. And then denied would mean if the action request was denied by the approver. I did mention just now that when considering the workflows, whether to use them for your personal actions, and there are several factors to consider. You will want to start with your business process requirements. First of all, consider if an approval is even required for that transaction or not. Do you need to notify someone when a step is completed in order to take an additional action? Do you have the requirements for audit trail maybe related to the request? Keep in mind that if an approval is required sometimes, but not other times, you can set up conditions to automatically approve or reject the workflow based on conditions. And that would obviously improve the usability of the system. When you have more than one workflow for the same personnel action type, consider that what are the differences between the workflows? Can you use a sub workflow to manage the portions of the workflow that are same, for example? Right. Keep in mind that you can put conditions on the overall workflow for running or on a specific work item within the workflow. You can also create manual or conditional decisions to branch the workflow based on your specific business requirements. When you use conditions, you can automatically approve or reject an item based on systematic checks. And obviously, this applies to the whole workflow functionality that we have, right? Not specific to HR. If your business requirements are more complex or you need to integrate the data from the personnel actions into another system, you may want to consider using Power Automate to extend the workflow capabilities. You will need some sort of a middleware in order to capture or a place to capture the business events from the native workflow in Dynamics 365 Human Resources. For example, you can use Azure Service Bus, Event Grid, or an Event Hub. When you use F&O after the infrastructure merge, right, and that is the big thing which is coming, the infrastructure merge, right? You can use the native connector for the F&O, the Dataverse, or optionally use the service endpoints such as the Service Bus, Event Grid, or Event Hub. Again, one typical requirement that many customers have is the ability to approve the workflows directly from email. When you use Power Automate, you can have more granular control of the appearance of the emails, as well as the ability for users to click approve directly from the email or by using the Power Automate mobile app, right? You can also consider using Power Automate as a standalone solution without Dynamics 365 human resource workflows. For example, if you want to create an approval workflow process, a process flow for fixed and variable compensation that is similar, you can manage this directly in the Power Automate. You may need to consider the use of Power Automate to initiate requests as a means for users to enter details about the request. If you build a Power App for business processes, consider embedding that Power App into the user interface to improve the usability of your overall solution. Some of the considerations when implementing personnel actions, let me quickly go through them. From an architectural standpoint, a custom field would be added directly on the position table, for example. However, when you use personnel actions, there is a separate table that is used to store the request information, and then the data is copied to the actual position table when the personnel action is completed. You could add a custom field to the secondary table. However, the data would not get copied to the actual position when the personnel action is completed, right? And that's why custom fields cannot be edited with the personnel actions. Second is that there is a parameter that can be enabled. So completed or approved actions cannot be deleted by default. And then there is a parameter that can be enabled to allow you to delete a completed personnel action. So this parameter is off by default. If you want to delete the completed personnel actions, you will need to enable that parameter. And when you're setting up the personnel action types, you can control which users can use each type. Consider, for example, if the manager role should be empowered to create requests and use specific personnel action types. If no roles are specified, then all the users will have access to all the personnel action types. And then be sure to consider the user experience and security requirements for managers to request changes that trigger a personnel action from the manager self-service. And the last one is, whether there are multiple actions required to support different types of requests. If there are different approval process flows or requirements across departments or business units, for example, You may need to create multiple personal action types for each type of action and link a different workflow. This will allow you the flexibility to model the different processes across your organization. And with that, I will move on to the first demo for today. And before I actually run the demo, one thing for you to note is that the demos have been recorded on the new merged infrastructure. So you will see them running on your F&O infrastructure environment, right? So H&R running on the F&O environment, right? I will just play that now.
So I'm here in finance and operations in an early release of the HR infrastructure merge. What I'm going to do to start is navigate into the human resources module and then navigate into human resources shared parameters. Here you'll see a tab called personnel actions. This is where you can enable both worker actions and position actions. Once you've enabled either one of the actions, you can also optionally select the parameter to allow the deletion of completed worker actions and position actions. Once you've enabled the features, you'll need to also go create some personnel action types under Setup and then Personnel Action Types. Here, you can create new personnel action types. For this example, I'm going to create a new personnel action type that is called Hire Contractor. In the personnel action drop-down box, I will select the Hire a Worker. If you want to use a workflow, you can optionally click the drop-down box and select the workflow that you want to use. In the security roles for this action tab, you can click the add button to optionally add security roles that will be allowed to create this particular action type. If you do not add any security roles, then this particular personnel action type will be available for all security roles. When you're done, you're ready to start creating personnel actions. Personnel actions can be viewed and maintained in the Human Resources module. For worker actions, underneath the Workers section, if you expand the Actions folder, you can see a variety of pages that allow you to manage and maintain your worker actions. Let's start by clicking on All Worker Actions. Here you can see a list of all of the worker actions. This includes hiring, terminations, and transferring of workers. You can select an existing one and open it to edit the details or click on the edit button. You can also manually create a new worker action by using the worker action button at the top and then selecting a personnel action type. But most typically, a worker action or a position action will be created directly from the worker or the position or from the manager self-service workspace if you're allowing managers to create personnel actions. So let's close this down and navigate into the employee self-service workspace. Here, I'll click on My Team where I can see the details about my team that reports directly to me. You can see at the top there are some buttons to request a new employee, contractor, or position. For workers that are already assigned to you, by selecting a particular worker, you can see buttons across the top that allow me to create personnel actions related to that particular worker. Let's go ahead and request a new position. This will open up a dialog where you can select the personnel action type. For this example, I'll use the new position without a workflow, and I can optionally select a reason code. We'll say organizational growth. When I'm ready, you click Continue. This will open up a new screen where you can see the details about the position action. I can type in some budgetary comments. The Comments tab allows me to use the Add button to type in more details about this change. The General tab allows me to select the details about this particular position. I'll need to select the job that this new position will be related to. I'll select accountant. I'll also need to select the reports to position. In this case, I'm going to have the new accountant role report to the Chief Financial Officer. I can update other details about this position, add in some details about the position duration, add relationships, enter in payroll details, and so on. When you're ready, you can simply use the complete button to complete this position action. If your position action has workflow, you'll also need to submit this to the workflow. Since this particular position action does not have a workflow, I can simply click the complete button. Once the position action has been completed, you'll notice that all of the fields are grayed out and you can no longer make changes to that position action. If I close down this window, I can go into the positions page and see the details about this new position that I created. So I've navigated into Human Resources and opened up the All Positions. Here you can see this new position that I created, number 591 for the accountant. If I click on this position, I can see the details about this particular position. In the action pane, there's a button here called Position Actions. This will open up a screen where I can see the details about the position and the changes that have been made. Here you can see that position action that I created, which was the position action that was generating or creating this new position. If I need to make additional changes to this position, I can do that by clicking on the Edit button. This will open up a new personnel action where I can now put in the details or update and make changes to this position, and this will be tracked as its own position action. So I'm here.
Great. So moving on to the next topic for today, which is data effectivity. And date and time fields are a fundamental concept in Dynamics 365 Human Resources. It is important to understand how to work with date and time data forms in forms, Dataverse, and external resources. The data management framework, Excel add-in, Dataverse, and Power BI reporting are all designed to interact with data directly on the database level. Since there is no client to adjust date and time data to the time zone of the user, all the date and time values are in UTC, which can lead to some incorrect assumptions when entering or viewing data. Date and time data submitted via DMF, Excel, or Dataverse is assumed to be in UTC by the database. This can cause some confusion when the submitted date and time value doesn't display as expected because the user viewing the data doesn't have their user time zone set to UTC. Some of the things to note from the user interface perspective include the position and time employment always show in the user's time zone. Benefits, they are shown in the user's time zone as well. Compensation shows in the company's time zone. So this is the following is a recommended setting that we recommend, right? Or the setting that we recommend with respect to time zone, that the user time zone should be set up to equivalent to GMT. And in case if the users are company specific, then user time zone should be the company time zone. There are many records in Dynamics 365 Human Resources that use data effectiveness on the table. This means that every time a change is made to the data, a new record is created, and the old record is expired. From a user experience standpoint, the user may not be aware that this is happening as the records are copied, duplicated behind the scenes. When these types of changes are made, the system keeps track of the previous value and the new value. For each of these pages, there is a changes timeline button that allows you to either view the changes or manage the changes. The view changes option lets you view what changes have been made, while the manage changes option lets you make, update, change the effective dates as well as revert to the old version or delete a version. On this slide, is displaying the changes that are tracked for workers, positions, and jobs. With that, I will move to my next demo, which is about managing the changes in the application.
So I'm here in Finance and Operations with an early version of the HR infrastructure merge. I'm going to navigate into the Human Resources module and open up the Workers page. Here, I'll select a worker who has had some changes made to its record. Next, I'll click on the Changes Timeline button in the Versions group of the Action pane. You'll notice there are two options. First, let's click on View Changes. When you use the View Changes, it will show you the details of all of the changes that have been made. So you can see that an office location and title were added in September of 2012, and later a building address was added. Recently, a veteran status was also updated. You can see in the old value what the old value was and what the new value is. In this case, all of the values were updated from a blank value. You can't make any changes when you're in the View Changes. However, if we close this and click on Changes Timeline again, and this time selecting Manage Changes, this will open up a new page where you can see the changes that have been made. And we have the ability to update and make changes. So for personnel information, you can see that there have been two records. Personnel information includes family information, military information, and the expatriate ruling. If you switch to the Worker Summary tab, this will show you the changes that have been created for this particular worker. This includes basic information such as title, seniority date, original hire date, and anniversary date. You can also see the office location information. There's another tab for affordable care coverage groups where you can select a specific legal entity and then see any changes related to this particular worker in the selected legal entity and any changes that have been made to the affordable care coverage groups. If you click the Payroll Earnings Code tab, you can see any changes that have been made to the payroll earning codes. If a change has been made and you no longer want that change or you want to revert to the previous value, you can simply click on the Remove button. If you want to see exactly what the changes were, you can click on View Changes. This will open up the View Changes dialog filtered to this one specific change. I'm going to go ahead and remove this record and click Yes to confirm. Now you can see that that record has been deleted. If I go back to the worker record and open up the details, you'll notice that the military service veteran status field is empty because I've deleted that change. If I want to make the change again or select a different value, I can simply use the drop-down box to select the fields and I can add in additional information. So in this case, I've added the veteran status and a military service start date and military service end date. I'll click Save. And if I use the Changes timeline and select View Changes, you can see 3 records are created. I can see that the field that was modified was veteran status, military service start date, and end date with the values that I entered. Again, if I use Changes timeline and click Manage Changes, I can see those details. You'll notice in the Manage Changes field that the changes are grouped together. So in this case, there's one record here with an effective date of today, And the veteran status, military service start date, and service end date are all displayed in a single record. If you click on View Changes, you can see the breakdown of the individual fields that were updated. From here in Finance and Operations.
All right, so that was the second demo for the session. Moving on to the security and advanced access. So in this slide, I'm basically going through the configuration options which are available for the advanced access, right? This is beyond the normal access of the user security and roles that we would have. And the first one is under the human resource shared parameters, you would find advanced access. In that, you are able to restrict access to work information by legal entity. You can enable cross-company compensation view, as well as you can enable cross-company leave view. The second one is, which is found under the human resource parameters, is the compensation related advanced access, where you can restrict access to the compensation plans. And the third advanced access is also under the human resource parameters, which is manager self-service view options, where you can select whether to show to the managers in the manager self-service the expiring records, the open positions, as well as exiting workers or not. Besides the advanced access, different possibilities exist to assign the security roles by legal entity. In order to do that, first of all, go to the system administration, links and users, search for the user you want to assign security to, then assign the role by clicking on assign roles, select the role from the list and click OK, and then assign the organizations. To do that, you would select the role in the user roles FastTrack, click assign organizations, click grant access to specific organizations individually, and then select the organizations and then click grant. And then you may close the window. Moving towards the later part of the agenda, talking about the do's and don'ts of the implementation. And these are really important, and we have faced them during the different implementations that we have overseen with the FastTrack. So the do's and don'ts specific to personnel actions, and I'll quickly go through them. You can read them on the screen as well. The first one is you should be using the personnel actions to drive communication between the business and HR. Use the workflow to help streamline and automate the business process related to personnel actions. Define a strategy for empowering the business to submit personnel actions. Use personnel action types and workflow to drive different processes. However, on the other side, do not use the custom fields on personnel actions that need to be modified in downstream workflow steps. Like we discussed earlier, that those cannot be used in the personnel actions. Do not import data information in a local time zone. We discussed about the date effectiveness and all the limitations around the date, as well as the number sequence. If you are sharing data between HR and F&O, which essentially will go away, right, with the new HR infrastructure merge. But for now, if you are implementing and you are sharing data across HR and F&O, for all the shared entities, right, for all the data that is going to be shared, do not use the same number sequence. Some of the feature management options to consider when implementing personnel management. One is the database logging, right, or the auditing. It is a means of tracking changes to records. It's track inserts and updates and deletes. The values are stored in database log for further analysis. Right. And then the second option, which you can find in the feature management, which is not turned on by default, is simplify, streamline employee entry. It is an efficient entry of employee and employment data. It's more intuitive in terms of navigating, and it helps you to quickly update the work history information for past, active, and future employees and contractors. The last thing in the agenda for today are the checklists and the resources that we have compiled for you. And when we upload this Tech Talk, there will be a presentation, and in that presentation, this checklist and resources will be there. All right. So let me quickly go through those checklists. There are a total of 5 checklists that we have prepared, and you can use them as to guide you through the implementation and the setup process of your application. Right, on each checklist on the left-hand side, there are resources that would help you, the links to resources that are good to read before you get on to implementing the application. And on the right-hand side of these checklists are the steps that you need to do in order to, for example, in this one, configuring jobs. So you would start with this checklist of, you would define and create the job titles, job types, tasks, families, area of responsibility, compensation levels, rating models, skills, certificate types, test types, education, screening types, accommodation types, job templates, and then you would go to jobs. Similar to that, the checklist for configuring positions, right? On the left-hand side, you see the resources, the links to the resources, and then on the right-hand side, the checklist to create, including the prereqs to create positions, right? So you would define the HR shared parameters for positions. You would configure and select the number sequence for positions, the departments, and then the jobs you would create, position types, compensation regions, pay cycles, compensation codes, benefit plans, labor unions, union agreements, financial dimensions, position hierarchy types, and then you would create the positions. The third one is configuring the checklist for workers, right? And then here is the baseline checklist. Again, on the left-hand side, the resources, and the right-hand side, the checklist for configuring the workers. All right, starting with the parameters, the workers, right, and going through a similar type of list, going through the jobs and positions, the prereqs, which we just discussed in the previous checklist, the ethnic origins, veteran statuses, worker tasks, reason codes, employee categories, employment types, payment frequencies, regulatory establishments, calendars, application types, issuing agencies, screening types, payroll learning codes. And while I'm going through this list, this checklist will serve you and help you to do the implementation. A lot of times we have seen where consultants and the customers are coming back to us saying that we are not able to configure it, we are getting errors. So if you follow the checklist, for the most part, you will not face those very obvious issues. This is our guidance to also start your implementation. So when you are starting from the business point of view, you also understand what the system allows you to configure and to store what type of information, and then you can work your requirements accordingly as well. So in order to configure the application, in order to go live with the application, right, or to go into the build phase, you would understand already what are the different data requirements that are there to configure all those options. Moving on to the next checklist, which is the hiring of workers, right? And which is, again, it starts with hire a worker, assign worker to a position, add worker task assignments. And if you see the whole list, right, the reason was this, that it's a bit complicated, right? You need to do a lot of steps, and yes, you could do them in different sequences. We have put them in a series of sequence and a sequence of checklists, as well as within the checklist we have for a sequence, which should work for you, and you wouldn't be worried about thinking of the sequence when you are setting up your own application. So certainly an asset or guide to take with you as a takeaway from this session. All right, and then you can obviously go through the list. The last of the checklist, and I think this is the last, right, is your checklist for configuring the personnel actions, right? Because that was the last topic. So starting from the jobs, positions, workers, hiring the workers, and then now the personnel actions. These type of different checklists will also be available in all the different tech talks that we are doing. And so do look forward to those. And this last checklist, again, this one has a link to the resource that we have compiled for you, some FAQs, as well as the baseline checklist, right? And by no means there could be a step missing. So we would look to receive your feedback on the contact details that we have provided. If we have missed out on anything, if there's anything that you identify, please let us know. And we can update those checklists for everyone's benefit. So yeah, if you haven't been using Dynamics 365 Human Resources up till now, here's the link to get a free trial Dynamics 365 or Human Resources access, right? As well as links to the different Learn sessions, as well as the Tech Talks and the different documentations that we have. So we have compiled everything in one place. Great. And with that, I will look at my colleague, Stephen. Do we have any questions? Have we answered the questions that we had?
Yes, at this point, all of the questions have been answered.
Great. This is good to know. So thank you, Stephen, for answering all the questions. If you have any further questions as well, please do reach out to us and we would be happy to answer those questions and also embed them in our FAQ documents, which are available online already. Great. So with that, I hand it over back to David.
All right. Thank you, Adil. I am posting a link in the chat right now for a survey, and we'd like your feedback on today's session and hear what you'd like to see in the future. Thank you for your participation. As a reminder, the recording of today's session will be available on the TechTalks Community Dynamics page within 5 business days. I'd like to extend a big thank you to our presenters and audience for joining us today.